Who's this Santa?
That's Arthur Claus, actually, and he's giving out toys to children. See? Nothing bad happens in this scene. Absolutely nothing. Terrifier 3 is finally out in theaters, and I have a lot to say about it in today's review. This holiday slasher offers up new lore, the craziest deaths this franchise has ever seen, and an ending that will melt any horror fan's face. In today's deep dive, I want to answer questions that every Terrifier fan seemingly has. Did this film successfully top the bedroom scene with its gory moments, and does this story lend itself to more movies in the franchise? Now, without further ado, let's dissect Art the Clown's Christmas Massacre. Hey everybody, I'm Killjoy Jake, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. The Terrifier franchise has snowballed from a viral short film in 2011 to a $35,000 feature that broke out on Netflix to a $250,000 sequel that pulled $15 million from an extended run in theaters to the present day, where a third entry made for nearly $5 million is breaking into the mainstream. Although Art the Clown usually rips people apart on Halloween, he's ambitiously throwing his hat into the ring of Christmas horrors this time around. The holiday element is so thoughtfully laced into nearly every sequence, sometimes it's even easy to miss. For example, a crucial sequence in the third act features one of the characters opening a present with broken wrists. By this part of the movie, you're almost sure they can't do more with the holiday concept, but it keeps going. Like a lot of the best sequences in this franchise. Speaking of which, Leone delivers on the gore. There are two sequences in this movie that are some of the sickest I have ever seen in a movie theater. I have never reeled back in disgust more in my life. While nothing goes on for as long as the bedroom scene in Terrifier 2, nearly every death is more brutal than what we've seen prior. Any of these scenes would be the best kill in another slasher franchise. For Terrifier, this is just another day of the week. The Tinsley team did an excellent job here with the practicals. The VFX team that includes Killjoy cult member Killjosh Petrino did an excellent job enhancing nearly every brutal shot of this monstrosity as well. Terrifier 3 features a sharper plotline than the previous two films, showing that Damien Leone is constantly improving as a writer. Spliced in between Art's madness is emotionally effective scenes with Sienna Shaw and her extended family. The whole movie is paced really well until an admittedly choppy second half that left more to be desired with the human story at hand. There's a specific scene I wish we had a chance to witness that's almost disrespectful to do off screen in my opinion. That's all I'm gonna say for now. The performances across the board are superb. Lauren Lavera brings so much more to the character of Sienna this time around by showing her struggle with her trauma. It's a major final girl trope at this point, but it never feels like Terrifier 3 is just going through the motions. Lauren puts her own spin on it, making it feel fresh, especially here in a franchise that is yet to deal with this sort of character arc. The previous final girls either got shot in the face 1,000 times or possessed by the entity. Speaking of which, Victoria Hayes, played by Samantha Scafidi, absolutely nailed this one. She didn't have a whole lot to do in the first Terrifier, which makes her chilling performance so surprising. With her Deadite-inspired voice, she carries a lot of the much-desired lore explanations throughout this threequel's runtime. I was shocked to see her have so much more of a crucial role in this film than I ever would have thought. The best part about Terrifier 3 is that while it does offer up a few answers to questions from the previous film, it presents new ones that are even more puzzling. This franchise is turning into the new Saw, where each new entry feels like the next chapter of a melodramatic soap opera. A soap opera that features gallons and gallons of blood, that is. I love what they're doing with the story though, expanding it in a way that doesn't lose what makes this series so compelling. That's about all I can say without spoiling anything, so we're gonna move into the spoiler section of this review now. Viewer beware, continue watching if you dare. Ooh. There's no better place to start with Terrifier 3 than its controversial opening. Just as I predicted, this film is non-linear, showing us a random bit of Art's massacre that somehow fits into the rest of this story. When Art had time to go after this family post having the Santa suit, I don't really know. I definitely have to give this one a second watch to see if there's any sort of nod towards that later on in the film. Maybe I missed it. Back in November of 2023, the internet erupted after the first Terrifier 3 teaser that featured Art the Clown in his big red suit, looking to plant an axe in a little girl's head. Some said that Terrifier 3 would be crossing a line if they had their fictional slasher go after a child. I think that crowd missed out on some of the most popular horror movies of all time. For example, It from 2017 opens with a child getting eaten by a space clown. Or what about Jaws? You know, the first blockbuster ever that not even halfway through the film, Alex Kittner, poor little Alex Kittner, gets eaten by the shark in a fountain of blood. There are countless examples of this happening in horror films, not just the super popular ones either. Thankfully, while it is controversial, I think the opening scene was surprisingly tasteful. It's terribly upsetting to see the aftermath, a dismembered child's body parts scoured across blood-soaked sheets, but we never actually see it as it's happening. More proof that Terrifier will go right to that line line but never fully cross it. This is important, I think, because at the end of the day, this franchise is about celebrating the slasher genre, shock value, and flat-out fun. You could lose some of those crucial elements if the scenario becomes too grim. More things I loved about this opening scene was the sound design. Art's axe swings into Jennifer's gut, arm, and head were so gnarly it made me want to vom in just the first couple of minutes. The visuals were crazy, but the sound design was so well done. It made me feel faux pain in the same areas as Jennifer. You really feel every impact as if it's happening to you. I also love that Juliet's fate is open-ended. It's scarier to let your mind wander there. What does Art do next after cutting the rest of Juliet's family into tiny pieces? After this, we cut back to the ending of Terrifier 2 at the Miles County Psychiatric Hospital, where Art's decapitated head is sucking the meat out of the nurse's neck, which in turn is being funneled into Victoria's mouth through what I think is an umbilical cord? How is this more f***ed up than the opening? Here we get our first lore update as Victoria says the entity is making her do this. It feels like a Deadite-style trick as she breaks character and goes after Burke. Throughout the film, the entity is able to give us a ton of info on its ultimate objective, which seems to be possessing Sienna. Although I missed the little pale girl here, I again have to praise Samantha Scaffidi's performance. I was worried Damien wanted to shoehorn this character in again just to have a through line to that original film, but her presence was paramount to making this extension of the story work. This scene ends with Vicky and Art's body ripping off different pieces of Chris Jericho's face. The jaw rip especially was outrageous. The film reintroduces us to Sienna Shaw, who just got out of a mental hospital. She apparently sees flashes of the dead from the previous film, even though we only get one scene of something like that with Brooke. This scene was really cool and called back to horror movies like American Werewolf in London, but the idea ultimately felt underdone, as it could have had more relevance to what was going on here in 3. It kind of felt like an unnecessary Marvel cameo appearance. I just wish these ghosts did something like aid Sienna in destroying Art the Clown. Maybe we'll revisit this in part 4 though. It could be one of those seeds Damien likes to plant in a previous film to expand upon in the future, just like how he did with T2 to the 3rd film. I really loved Sienna in this film though, dealing with one of the most ancient final girl sequel tropes of all time, but again in a very unique light. Trauma! No, not trauma. Get out of here, Toxie! Lauren Lavera's performance here is what really sells this, feeling like, hot take incoming, a more centered and controlled version of Laurie Strode from Halloween 2018. Sienna struggles to keep it together here, but she saves an outburst for the deserving Mia, who comes on way too strong. This works really well for me, showing a downward spiral for the character throughout the whole film. It feels perfectly paced with its human story that kept me engaged at every turn. This is without a doubt Lauren's best performance so far, even if the ending of this one feels more like Empire Strikes Back rather than A New Hope. It is nowhere near as triumphant as the ending of Terrifier 2, but God, I want Sienna to kick that clown's ass in the next entry so badly. Bring on part 4! We have to talk about David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown here. David brings that same silly energy from part 2 while finding a few menacing moments that call back to the original film. The scene where Art meets Santa at the bar I feel is a microcosm of this. Art gets so excited to see Santa that he rushes past 2 potential victims to sit on the guy's lap. I also want to note that these 2 girls at the bar strike a resemblance to Dawn and Tara from part 1. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but it certainly had me thinking about those 2. Anyways, this might be the funniest scene of the movie, where Art fanboys over Santa. I had tears streaming down my face, I was laughing so hard. After Clowny spits his whiskey in old St. Nick's face and pisses on him, Santa goes into rage mode. Art whips out a Glock from his bag of tricks and shoots the barkeep in the neck. He also executes the ice cream man himself, Clint Howard. F's in the chat, everyone. This scene gets real mean-spirited as Art the Clown ties up Santa Claus, freezes his limbs with liquid nitrogen, and smashes his flesh into tiny glassy pieces. This scene in particular echoes a lot of what Damien Leone had said about the film prior to its release, feeling like a cross between the last 2 films. He succeeds in finding that terror from the original again here that made me feel uneasy in ways the sequel just doesn't. I do have one major issue with Terrifier 3 that had me scratching my head though. Jonathan Shaw is a beloved character from the sequel that got very little screen time here and an off-screen death. It felt very disrespectful to do that to this character, even though I've been predicting the guy's downfall since this movie went into production. Depriving us of an emotional death feels like a massive missed opportunity that was utilized instead as a fake out. Admittedly, that does feel very Terrifier and mean-spirited to put the glasses on the skull as a reveal, but this main character deserved an on-screen death. This really bummed me out. The back half of this movie feels really choppy too, as if there are missing scenes. I loved what we got to see here, but I think Terrifier 3 has the opposite problem of the sequel. It's way too short. This film lent itself to an even bigger story than part 2, and I think think the narrative would have been aided by another 20 minutes. Why didn't we see Sienna dig up the sword at the Terrifier? And why didn't Uncle Greg or Jonathan get on-screen deaths? These were main players in this film. Should I just wait for answers in part 4? Probably. Maybe these are just more strings like how I was talking about earlier, where Leone is just waiting until the next film to give us answers. Considering that he did exactly that here in part 3, I'll hold my judgment until I see the next one. I'm gonna give the Terrifier team the benefit of the doubt. What if Jonathan is still alive? Speaking of which, we finally got to meet Sienna's father. Jason Patric does a great job in his limited role here, giving us a peek behind the curtain of the prophetic Terrifier lore. A lot of these scenes feel like they're setting up the next film, which again, I don't mind, but it has me hungry for more. We see the moment that her father gets the brain tumor that helps him warn Sienna of the danger to come, and what will ultimately kill him. The demon in what I assume is hell makes a new version of Sienna's armor. Considering how this film ends, Terrifier 4 will likely take us to the Ninth Circle, where Sienna has to put on a new version of the angel costume to defeat Satan, maybe? At the very least, Sienna's gotta save Gabby. There is also a deeper cut into Art the Clown's backstory. From the Demolition Dudes, we learned that a serial killer buried a bunch of kids in the basement of the house where Art the Clown resides back in the 90s. That's gotta be him, right? We also learned from Jonathan that demons can only break into our world through the presence of pure evil, Art the Clown. This lends itself to many fan theories that suggest Art was a normal serial killer that a demon latched onto. That explains his supernatural powers and aimless chaos. I mean, think about it. If a serial killer couldn't die, he would basically be Art the Clown. No real goal, just murder without consequence. Anyways, I really like the direction that the Terrifier franchise is headed. And it wouldn't be a review of a Terrifier film if I didn't talk about my favorite kills. This is surprisingly a complicated topic this time around for a few reasons. First of all, the question many of us have been asking for years now: does the shower sequence top the bedroom scene? For me, yes and no. Nothing in this movie goes on as long as Allie's death from part 2, so you don't have that painful dread of constantly cutting back to this person receiving the worst fate a human being could possibly suffer through. But the kills as a whole here are crazy impressive and would easily top the best moment from any other slasher movie. The shower scene, for instance, is glorious and very well thought out. We get a thematic death for Mia, who fangirled over Art the Clown earlier, and a vicious bifurcation for her boyfriend. It's so hard to watch, I needed a shower afterwards, and no, not one with chainsaw-wielding murder clowns. I also love the juxtaposition of the goofy Terrifier Christmas song playing in the background. Just like the bedroom scene, you reel back in terror at first, but then you can laugh at how ridiculous the sequence becomes. Instead of salt and bleach here, though, you get a hilarious overkill that has you laughing alongside Art. Maybe not so silently, however. My absolute favorite death of the movie has to be the glass tube with the rats. As some of you know who have been here since my Halloween Ends coverage, I'm a big fan of rats. I've seen something similar to this done in Sinister 2, but nothing matches the viciousness of Sienna's aunt's death. I don't even know what the worst part is. Smashing a glass tube down her throat with a hammer, heating the other end of it up so a rat crawls into her throat, or slitting her throat so the rats can crawl out. It's so creative, it might just top the pretzel kill from In a Violent Nature. It's a close call at the very least. Bravo, Damien. There's one more little note I have with Terrifier 3 that feels like a symptom of its popularity. It's so self-referential at times, I could see some fans walking away with the same criticisms they had back with Hellraiser 3. It turns its slasher into a self-aware icon that almost feels like Flanderization. I love when Art has some silly moments, but it feels a bit forced and kinda like mainstream horror to have the guy basically breaking the fourth wall here. When he pantomimes a response to Mia's comments that he's the most popular serial killer since Jack the Ripper, again, it's funny and obviously referring to Art's growth and popularity. But this feels like a bit I would have seen in Deadpool and Wolverine, not Terrifier 3. Maybe I'm nitpicking too much, but I just wasn't crazy about these scenes in the movie, outside of the hilarious marketing, of course. I'm happy that these movies are successful, but I think Terrifier has to stay indie to continue its increase in quality. If they forget where they came from, I'm terrified Art the Clown could become a mere caricature of himself in a future installment. It's certainly not a problem yet. I absolutely loved Terrifier 3, but while most things here were an improvement, I am starting to notice some cracks forming that have me worried for part 4. What the next entry needs to avoid becoming too mainstream feeling is a similar budget to this film and more time for Damien to cook. Let him cook! Terrifier 3 was made in a significantly shorter time period than part 2, which I think resulted in some of its small issues. Give Damien creative freedom to make a movie however long he needs it to be. Terrifier 3 clearly needed more to tell the full extent of its story, and I hope the next one can avoid this. The Terrifier series is solidified as my favorite slasher franchise after this sequel. It's not perfect throughout its 3-movie run, but but what we have here is something special that hasn't been done before. I'm being a little tough on this third entry because part 2 was so impressive, but god, I had a great time with this one. In my opinion, Terrifier 2 is still my favorite slasher movie, and while the third film improves in performances, gore, and cinematography, I feel that its narrative gets a little choppy in the back half. I'm worried that art is becoming flanderized, but that cliffhanger ending here has me on the edge of my seat waiting for more. I loved Terrifier 3, but I think 2 is still my favorite all things considered. Terrifier 3 gets a 9 out of 10 from me. This is a phenomenal, groundbreaking slasher film that showed us things other horror flicks would never dare touch. Although I have problems with it, the good heavily outweighs the bad, and I hope this series never dies. The horror genre needs a franchise like Terrifier to push boundaries and remind us that the offensive can be fun if we open our minds. When horror gets too safe, like how some would argue it has become lately, it loses the edge that makes this space so creatively freeing. Horror seems to be the final frontier for unmitigated creative expression, where other genre films these days can all feel like they're coming from the same factory. Films like Terrifier 3, The Substance, and Immaculate from just this year are wildly original and prove that horror movies are still not to be missed for those looking for something fresh. What did you guys think about Terrifier 3 though? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe so I can feed my cats. Thank you all for watching, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.